Volume Podcast.
Hi there, my name is Hessie Jones. I am a venture partner at Matter Ventures. I'm also a fractional COO at Beacon Trust Network.
Hi, Hessie, and welcome. So what's in you? What drove you towards what you do today?
So thank you, Philippe, for having me today. What I do today is almost a culmination of everything that I've learned. Call it age, call it wisdom, call it reckoning. But I started out my career in data. I used to be a data marketer, and coming out of university, my first job was in direct marketing. My mother-in-law calls it, spam. At the time it was junk mail, but now we call it spam because now it's an email. But it really meant targeted advertising to people who you would think would buy your products. And back then, before digital, we had things like maybe demographic information. We had your address. We may have had your location. And then if we had a loyalty program, we had your historical purchases. So over time, this rise of digital got things to be a little bit more exciting because we had much more information. We were able to go just beyond your profile and garner data that evoke things like emotion, influence, beyond just purchase propensity, but it opened up a world of possibilities that would get us to the point that we could predict what you would do next. And as a data marketer, we're trying to find answers to that elusive question. How could we somehow get into the consumer's head to figure out what makes them tick and find the ideal customer that would be almost our most profitable one? So this was the notion called customer centricity. So figure out what their needs are and sell them something. And this is the weird thing is that you figure out their needs, but really you don't really want to figure out their needs. What you want to do is you want to manipulate them to buy your product. And that was the end game for a lot of marketers. But over time, data has become an increasingly invaluable asset because it's prevailed over everything. Many decisions are made because of data. And as we know, with all the documentaries online through The Great Hack as well as Social Dilemma, we're getting to the point where data can be contextualized at an individual level. If we get to the point where suddenly, we are in full data mode where we have not only conversations, but we have behaviors, we have people instrumenting their bodies, their cars, their homes, and suddenly we have all this information out there. The previous me loved that. And I'm going to tell you a quote that I saw on Twitter earlier this year. And this one girl said, "Data is not the new oil. Data is the new glitter. It lures humans with its shininess. It's very easy to accumulate. It's found in places you least likely to find it. It's almost impossible to get rid of, but everyone insists on using it without really thinking about the consequences." And to me, that's really powerful. It says a lot about how people don't really understand today what the ramifications are, especially when you're young. The Snapchats of the world, the Instagrams of the world. Yes, their platforms are giving you a way to actually talk about the things that are meaningful to you. And yet, at the same time, the information that you're continuously generating is actually being potentially going to be used against you. So I also worked at Yahoo, and it was a publishing and ad platform. So being part of an ad platform, and this was the mid 2008. This was probably 1 or 2 years before Facebook even launched in the world. And so the way we were compensated as employees was through three things. We were compensated through our ability to increase reach, revenue, and engagement. Engagement was the most important metric because we were trying not only to get people to stay on go to the platform, but stay on the platform. So the longer we could get them to stay, the more impressions we could generate, the more ad inventory we would garner, and so the more ad inventory meant that we had more opportunities for revenue. So you understand that cycle. So if I had this whole picture of the customer from their social profile to their online behaviors, what they clicked, what their transactions were, then we would stop guessing. That's essentially where we've gotten to, and I think we've been spoiled in being able to get to that point without any kind of hammer, like legislation, just wielding its fist at us, saying you cannot do that. But we have, and I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that we've gotten to that point with a little bit of silence on the other side, because legislation, the reason it's lagging is that there's no fundamental understanding to how this thing could happen. And so it becomes more of a reactionary mode and less proactive. So, I realize that over time, this interest in data, like for me, it was really about selling products, and it became innocuous at first, but I think what we've seen over time is that it's become really insidious. And so after almost 20 years of data marketing experience, I now consider myself pretty much an anti-marketer. I realize that we're crossing a dangerous line when it comes to this use of data, this manipulation of data. And I start to question whether or not we need all that data in order to make sound decisions. And I realize that we don't. Like, the issue is that technology has created what today is a standard for how information is actually used, how it's collected, how it's managed. And like I said, unless we have policy that keeps pace with that, changes will not happen. So we have to think of other ways in order to wield a different hammer that allows companies to act a little bit more responsibly.
That's a very interesting journey. And how is your work today?
How does it work today? Well, the nice thing about it is that there's an increasing amount of, I guess, awareness of what's happening. Like I said, there are documentaries that are out there that talk about the misuse of information, the manipulation of data to the point that it gets used in voter suppression and politics. It influences you to buy things that you may not have thought about just because your friend is buying them. It provokes you into discussions that you may not have normally been part of. And this whole idea of manipulation goes even to the other side, where it makes it difficult for you to even remove yourself from a platform. I'm sure you've heard of the term dark patterns. It's very much that way. It's like, how can I get somebody to buy something that's a little bit more expensive by making that button more prominent and the other button, which is a lower priced item, less prominent. I think the age-old example is Amazon, and how difficult it is, how many points of navigation it takes an individual to actually find that delete my account button. It's very hard. It's very hard. I know I've Googled it myself, and after a while you just give up. But I think what all of this has surfaced today is basically an ethical mindset. And there are a lot of practitioners out there, including me, that are thinking about these things and determining, like, what are the long-term ramifications. And so in spite of the fact that we have laws like the GDPR, which was supposed to have teeth, by the way. And to me, it's like it hasn't sharpened its teeth yet, because cross-border, it hasn't been in an enforceable mechanism to stop people from doing what they're doing. It's made companies like Google and Facebook, yes, it's punished them in very expensive fines. But those penalties are like pennies to an organization whose stock price continues to increase. So imagine putting in a $200,000, $500,000 fine for those kinds of penalties on a small company. It's going to crush the startup industry. And so when we talk about fairness, how companies that should be doing the right thing are not doing the right thing. They're setting a bad example for those companies trying to do the good things, but they just don't have the resources to be able to do that. And yet they're the ones being punished. So today there is a recognition for what's going on. And there's organizations that are popping up, nonprofit, as well as just individual consultations that are on Twitter that put together groups where they can just debate about whether or not certain laws are effective or not. But at the same time, they're starting to scrutinize, like, what are the things that need to be done to even educate the public, educate business on best practices, but also tools that are coming up. There's so many privacy alternatives out there, but people just don't know. So how do you change their mindset? And I think I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day because he works for a startup called Open House AI. And his belief from the very beginning was that there is no trade-off. There doesn't have to be a trade-off between privacy and profitability. You can actually have both. And if you start to think about whether or not you need to use Philippe's first name, last name, birth date, and his favorite restaurant in order to make your algorithm better, you better think twice. And in many cases, you may not need to, because all you're trying to do is optimize an experience. So if I can take your behavior, where you've gone, and what the outcomes were without actually knowing who you are or where you lived necessarily, but take like 1,000 Philippes from all over the world. How effective would that be to actually improve an algorithm without the use of PII information? And I think that's the question that we're asking. But I think the platforms have been spoiled to the point that they want to be able to personalize experiences. And when we talk about personalized, how far can they go to be able to use this information that can get the right result for the person that's willing to buy? And so we're not only talking about corporations, businesses that are trying to sell widgets online. We're also talking about government. We're also talking about other organizations and interest groups that have very strong agendas politically as well. And those are the very organizations that are in demand of this information. So that's essentially what we're fighting against. It's a mentality that says that the people that have the money are making the rules in the system, and that needs to change. And it leads to a point of, right now, and I look at this from the perspective of me, not only as a marketer, but I used to also be a banker. And then I realized that data has always been used to manipulate, whether or not we realize it. Because there's this notion, I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but lately there's been this talk of the colonization of data, the colonization of big tech. The fact that a few actors are making the rules for everybody. And the fact that these rules are disproportionately harming more vulnerable populations, whether or not they're poor, whether or not they're racialized. But that has always been in our systems, whether or not people realize it, because even in banking, like I realized that, everything starts off as a process. And that one person, let's say in 1960, that wanted to get a mortgage at a bank, he would sit at the desk with the mortgage specialist, and that mortgage specialist would make a determination based on his interview with that individual whether or not he deserved to have that mortgage. And over time, every single one of those meetings created a process, created an optimized model that said, these are the type of people that are profitable to our company. And so when you look at this idea of loan adjudication, over time, this process has become automated to the point that you're always looking for that specific type of individual so that it mitigates your risk. And so I remember being a credit card marketer, and I always use this example because this example shows that you don't realize until much later how much the data has been biased. And so in credit cards, every time we send out a promotion, we have this thing called a kill file. And a kill file is essentially a suppression list of data that we don't want to send out because these people could be considered high risk to the bank. And within that, we identify social insurance numbers that start with 9. And everybody knows in Canada that when you have a social insurance number that starts with 9, it means you're not a permanent resident to Canada. You're a new immigrant. And so by virtue of that, you actually don't have a credit history. If you don't have a credit history, then a bank doesn't know whether or not you're actually creditworthy. So even though you may actually come from, let's say, a wealthy family, but you just moved to the country a few months ago, and even though you have a job, by virtue of that one variable, you will be knocked out of the system, and you will not even be offered a credit card offer from the bank. So that already is biased. It takes one number to make a specific determination about a population, and it basically says you're not worthy. Those are the kinds of things that happen in everywhere in our systems, whether or not it's through, let's say, employment, how your hiring practices, whether or not you have insurance. Like, there are variables out there that to me have been in the system for so long. It's been colonized by a few that actually serve a population that over time has become the comfortable, profitable customer to the bank. Everyone else, they fit into another category. So if you think about the kill file that I was talking about, the more that you add attributes to the kill file, the more it's going to harm other populations, and it's going to create a bigger divide. So my question with things like that is that, if you have newcomers that come to the country and they're trying to do things like save for their child's education, they won't be able to, because they will not meet the minimum standards that a bank requires in order to actually do that. So that's where innovation comes in. So are there innovative ideas to serve the very groups that are being, rejected by big banks? Those kinds of things. And I think that's where I'm starting to see some really important innovations come out that are almost like the opposite of the bias in the very systems that have created them. So that's an important indicator.
Hessie, thank you for sharing that. So by going through this process, how did that change your vision of the world?
Well, so I look at, one thing I didn't tell you is that, so after I stopped marketing, I started working for startup companies. And I went into startups that did things like behavioral profile and customer journey analytics. And that's when I really got into AI ethics and privacy. I realized the amount of information that we were getting was stuff that we didn't need in order to create an algorithm. Like over time, I end up purposely working with privacy startups that were, for the most part, trying to transform things like a privacy policy. And Beacon Trust Network is one of the ones I'm working for right now that's trying to kind of democratize the privacy policy so it doesn't become this onerous legalese document that nobody understands and puts really the onus on the consumer to be able to say, yes, I agree with your privacy policy, but it also puts the the small business and the medium business owner to account to realize exactly what they're doing in their operation and how they're collecting their data. So I'm working with startups like that. I used to work with a company that wanted to build an end-to-end encryption system that gave a person control over their information. And last summer during COVID, I helped co-found My Data Canada, and it's part of the umbrella of mydata.org. And we believe in the right to self-determination. And it was important for me to actually start this in Canada, especially amidst COVID, because of the number of applications that were out there, exposure notification apps, as you know, that were starting to verge into collecting information about people in locations that could potentially stigmatize them, whether or not either they had it or now is whether or not they have the vaccine. So I also started, it's weird how COVID catalyzes everything. I started to work in a venture capital company, and we launched it amidst what happened in the States from George Floyd. And I realized that everything that I was doing from AI startups to privacy, and also bias led me to a point in venture capital to only start investing in what we call underestimated founders. And it's people of color, minorities, BIPOC, LGBTQ, women, newcomers to the country. Because I realized that you could try to stop bias in it through technology, but what we also are seeing is that if we don't have racialized minority groups at the table, then you're continuously going to have the problem of bias in systems and disparity in algorithms over time. So you not only have to solve it from a technological perspective, you also have to solve it from an investment perspective. And so the minute that you give these organizations a chance to actually build a product, create them, spread it all throughout the world, and also give them intergenerational wealth, then what you're doing is you're helping create wealth among populations that never had any before. And you're creating a snowball effect so that they actually have influence when it comes to policy, when it comes to innovation, etc. And so all of these things in my life are starting to coalesce together. And I think it's important to me right now to understand that it's really about bringing equity across systems through technology and through investment.
Wow. And so you're putting this change and this feeling and this story into work by creating this new work and ventures. In any way, did this also change you personally?
It did. I think the more I get in, so one thing I was not as versed on, and I needed to learn more about, was this idea of diversity and inclusion. And to me, that's the heart of it. It really is the heart of it. There is a reason why this is all happening together. And the personal part that really, I guess, changed me in the last at least 4 months was locally, something happened in the high school where my son goes to, and there was an incident where one child. He's not a child anymore. He's grade 12. He was a graduate, but it was a yearbook incident where the graduates were allowed to actually post something personal about who they wanted to thank because of someone who's had influence in their lives. And so everybody was able to create like a personal note that they could put in the yearbook. One of the kids put something about his grandmother that was really touching and said how she inspired him, etc. When the yearbook got published, his note, and he's a Black student, his note was published with a racialized slur. And it essentially called him a derogatory term. That got published, and it was incredibly hurtful to him and his family. And later on, we found out that it also happened to 7 or 8 other kids who were Black in the high school. And so that incident alone led me to contact the director of education and to say, like, why is this happening? I already knew that there were disparities in the system that already streamed kids that were Black into more of a basic program as opposed to an advanced program. And so I started digging into it a little bit more. And along the way, I met some wonderful people, not only in the D&I space, but people who actually are helping the families and the kids that are impacted by racism in their schools. And so to me, that it hit home in a lot of ways, because I realized I'm doing this thing where I'm trying to create equity in systems through technology and through investment, but it's not going to happen if we don't even give them a chance at the educational level. And so it means that not only, like, the systems have to change in order for this to happen. And that means hire more teachers that look like me, whether or not they're Asian, whether or not they're Black, whether or not they're Indigenous. Change the curriculum so that you actually give credence to the history of the Black people and the Indigenous people, what they've contributed to society, and not whitewash it by the history that we all grew up with. I mean, that's going to be really important. So what I've done on a personal level is develop a campaign with a few of my friends to actually give voice to the students who've experienced racism in the schools. Because the one thing I know is that the education system is not on TikTok. They're not on Instagram. They don't see or hear the pain that these kids are feeling. And so if we use those channels to amplify the voices of the kids, then the better it'll be. We'll use the information to create research to put in front of the school board and also the Ministry of Education, so that they can create some kind of lasting change within these systems. And that's really important for us. So on a personal note, to me, it's like I can't do any of this work unless all the systems change. And I don't know if my life is going to be long enough to be able to do that. But I'm doing what I can in my little corner of the world.
Usually my next question is, how do you think this affects whoever is listening to the podcast? You already talked about impact since we started the conversation, but is there anything related to how you would see this work impacting the life of whoever is listening to the podcast? Would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I think so. For the most part, I realize that we can't wait for government. We have to create a narrative among technologists to be able to debate what's possible. And I think one of the important things that I realize is that there is this reckoning that's happening, because it's forcing companies to change the way they do business, whether or not it's I have to increase my diversity score internally. I have to be able to do right by my customers. I have to be able to think about, if I'm going to do the right thing, am I willing to sacrifice a little bit of profitability and performance in order to make sure that my company is still around 10 years from now. Because I can tell you there is going to be a privacy reckoning, and laws are going to get tougher, but penalties shouldn't be the reason that people change. I think the one thing that will change, and people, and this to me is a democratization of data from the perspective of, if we're not going to use necessarily PII information, can we use alternative information that can still give businesses the data that they need to actually make things more effective? And I'm not sure if you know about the rise of synthetic data, but synthetic data to me is a way that will give all small businesses, startups, access to information by the creation of the synthetic data, so that they can actually start to build models. They don't have to rely on a Microsoft, a Facebook, and Amazon to actually say, okay, you can use my data, but you have to pay for it. Now you can democratize it by making it yourself, and then be able to use that information, so that now we reduce the demand for data through this data is gold narrative. And we start to see that, if we use data in a way that allows us to make business more effective, then it reduces the risk to the consumer. It reduces the risk of breaches. And over time, people feel a lot more comfortable with giving permission to use specific information. And I think that's the future. Gartner says that the next trend is really about how to mitigate the use of personal information, and synthetic data is in the next 3 to 5 years going to be coming up as hopefully potentially a standard.
And how do you see your work, your field of work, everything that we talked about, and also your work itself in 10 years? I'm hoping
in 10 years that I'm still in this venture capital space, but instead of actually focusing on investing in underestimated founders, that I'm just investing in founders who are doing amazing work, irrespective of gender, race, or ethnicity. I don't know if I'm not being too optimistic about that, because I know it takes time to change systems. I do believe that if we're going to make sure that this is permanent, we have to kind of band together and create communities that support all racialized groups, and to make sure that we're intentionally trying to build equity in the systems. I believe that's going to happen. I think it's just going to take a lot of time and heavy lifting to get there.
Hessie, thank you so much for sharing your journey. It was truly inspiring. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was very nice being here. Thanks, Billy.
The Volume Podcast. So if you enjoyed the episode and would like to get in touch with us or give us feedback, we are on Twitter at Volume Podcast. See ya. Thank you.